Welcome to Middle Fingers Up, the show where we hold our heads high and our middle fingers higher. I'm your host, Karen McKay. So, just want to start with this whole space you and I got going on. It's all about us doing a lot of those like reruns of rewriting, rescripting, rethinking, relearning, blah, 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 all that stuff. So, I'm hoping this is doing just that for you. And we're really here together to challenge some of these, call them what you want, old narratives, old stories, old thoughts, old beliefs, old things and stuff that maybe aren't serving us. They used to in some sort of way, aren't now, and trying to build upon that. So if you have been following along, we have been exploring some of these narratives behind what some of us are jokingly calling membership to the Angry Brown Girl Club. But it's not really a club anyone asks to join, is it? Instead, it's a space many of us find ourselves in because of society's power imbalances, the histories that are being erased or not taught, and the way really a lot of these dynamics, so our experiences, our beliefs, our values, our privileges, assumptions, all these sorts of things really shape us, and they can become these dynamics. Like in particular, I've been talking about the dynamics between white women and women of color, and this exploring that I've been doing about white feminism. These sorts of dynamics, they have derailed relationships between women of color and white women. I myself have been in many of these, so that is really where my curiosity lies around how can we come out of these moments and conversations with people we really care about, who really care about us, but coming out better, not worse. We've been making sense of how we got here and how to tend to these narratives, stories, experience, like I said, the stuffs and things that you want to call it, rather than erasing them and canceling them. The part about having a connection or a healthy relationship with someone and then it just sort of ending, it's interesting how we do this. And I know that there's some from my past that, okay, maybe I'm not going to come back from, but in this stage of life, I don't want to find myself as I get older in these kinds of conversations or relationships where they just come to a dead end and that's it. So we've been making sense of how we got here and how to tend to these stories, narratives, experiences rather than erasing them. Why? Because they matter, because our histories matter, because we owe it to the future. In segment 1, we explored what it means to apply for membership to the Angry Brown Girl Club, what it feels like to be labeled angry, emotional, or difficult when you're just simply trying to speak up. In segment 2, we reviewed the application by examining how defensiveness often stands in the way of accountability and becomes this blame game. And how can we shift from that to our own actions and grow. Now we're in segment 3, the interview. If the Angry Brown Girl Club were a real club, who would be leading it? What questions would they ask us about our own stories, our behaviors, and our growth? So, welcome to segment 3, the interview. If we want to rewire, reshape, rewrite these narratives that are belonging us to this club, maybe we can sort of start with a couple of questions. One is, what is mine to own in this conversation, in this interaction, in this segment? And then what am I overcompensating for that's out of my control? Defensiveness is a deal maker or breaker, and it's this key to unlocking change or staying stuck. Why does defensiveness matter? Okay, so maybe right here, I'll kind of just stop and say, I understand we touched a lot on defensiveness in segment 2, but I feel we need to stay here for a moment because it's such a pivotal point. Defensiveness doesn't just block connection. It also keeps us from tending to our own stories, our own narratives. And it's probably a good time to build off of where we started in segment 2. One of the ways I want to build off and start is just looking at the differences between being defensive and defending. And I want to break this down. So one of the most confusing parts of this journey for me has been figuring out where defensiveness ends and then like where defending begins. And maybe this is where I can stop. So if I could do a PSA here, it's just journaling can help. A lot of our guests recommend this. Personally, I feel it too. Writing out has really helped me. We look at the different layers of what's happening and connecting me to all of you. And I would suggest if you don't write, if you haven't tried it, sometimes prompt journals can help. Free writing can be overwhelming for some people. And because this is the interview, you're going to find a lot of questions coming up that maybe can help with some prompts, and writing some of this stuff out could be helpful. Okay, but that's enough for the PSA. So I want to break down defensiveness versus defending. So defensiveness can often show up as a reaction, something like automatic. You're trying to justify yourself, over apologizing, and sometimes even just shutting down and going silent. It's rooted in fear, am I being misunderstood? Am I not enough? Am I too much? All these sorts of things that get in the way, and can cause us to have this reactive response. And then defending is, on the other hand, is intentional. It's about standing firm in your values, your boundaries, your beliefs. And defending comes from a place of clarity, even if the whole situation's uncomfortable. For me, I had to get clear because I was not getting past this, I was getting defensive of the fact that I'm not defensive. And it's like, that's not true. Yeah, you get defensive, Karen. So why was I sort of struggling with that? Was because there are parts in my story, particularly about that dinner or in these power imbalances with my white friends or white people, the systems, that often put us in this group of the club of being angry because it seems like we're being so defensive. But what really is happening, we're defending the right to be treated equally and have a mutual respect. So I just want to help us women of color get that clear, because now that I understand that, I think I can get better at not coming off reactive and being defensive when I find myself in these situations. So sometimes when someone calls us out or calls us in, our immediate reaction might be to protect ourselves. And this can look like over apologizing to smooth things over, especially for women of color trying to navigate these white spaces. Other times it's like doubling down, saying, well, I survived and I'm fine. And then we're not really looking when we do that at what was the cost of survival? What if defensiveness is a signal, a clue to what's really at stake? Let's imagine the Angry Brown Girl Club has leaders. Wise, experienced women who have been navigating these dynamics in these white spaces for years and centuries. What would they ask us about how we show up in these moments? So if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of take us through an interview of reflecting. firstly, let's start with, what does defensiveness look like for you? Like, does it show up as silence, over-explaining, or something else? When you feel defensive, what value or belief would you say is being challenged? Maybe here I can just kind of point out, often, many of us, we don't want to admit, but we don't like being caught off guard. And that also goes back to childhood coping mechanisms, that whole fight, freeze, fawn, all that flight stuff. That whole being caught off guard can lead us to feeling stupid, embarrassed, like, I got to be in control. I should have known all of this. So part of that is like our safety mechanisms that take place. And then, with the whole fears and all that. And then some of that is our ego, which we can always thank for. But when I expand on this, often I go back to my childhood, and we pick up our coping skills at a young age, and then we often carry them out to our adulthood relationships. And sometimes we need a renovation of these skills because they served us as a child. It could have been a coping mechanism. It could have been a defense mechanism. It could have been a great strategy. But as we get older, it's like we grow, we evolve. And so we're still using these skills that could use some sharpening. And so sometimes it's like, let's thank those skills for helping us and serving us when they did, and then building upon them. And then sometimes it's like, okay, we need to really get rid of this. Like, I can't be doing this as a 43-year-old woman. So, I can't be covering my ears, stomping and trying to avoid you as a 43-year-old woman. Might have worked as a child. So how do you balance the need to defend your boundaries with the risk of over apologizing or overcompensating? So when I'm stuck with this and like really need to find the balance between this, I think a big part of this process for me is requiring self-awareness. And one way of requiring self-awareness is doing what we're doing here, asking questions. Maybe we have a therapist, maybe we're journaling, maybe we're taking the time by ourselves to reflect and think, to build insight. And another is, you sometimes have really good people in your small little tiny circle who know you really well and either can validate you and say, you're doing really well, I can see this growth, or can help us and say, I think you're missing the piece here and maybe you need to like tap into this. Sometimes it's hard because self-awareness is like, what you know. But I think if our heart is in wanting to grow and build, naturally we build on that. And so self-awareness is like something that's been helpful in this process of figuring all this out. And then also, what are my boundaries? Also having a clear understanding of my values, like what values need some renovating, upgrading, letting go. This self-awareness of really being honest of this isn't serving others around me, having this value or whatnot, helps me open the door to like being less judgy towards myself or closed off about actually wanting to talk about the things that I have privilege over, the things that I assume, the things that, my biases let get in the way. That sort of unlocks that for me when I allow myself to go there. So part of that is like, okay, why does this value exist in the first place? Start there and see where you end up. So if I'm confident that this aligns with, something that protects my well-being, is it something that's selfish to uphold? Is it necessary? Is it that it's protecting me, but doing so in a way that's really not helpful? Maybe it's more harmful, and it's also harmful to others. So like good values shouldn't really be harmful to others. Like it's not that's not hard. Like if you have a good value, is it possible that you can have values that aren't harmful to others? Values are about equality and seeing each other in a way that makes us want to be better, not something that just wants to make me better. Maybe this is a good place to talk about reframing values at the center of like what is mutual respect and growth. So when someone defends a boundary based on a value, it's essential to examine whether that value upholds respect, equity, empathy. if someone claims a value justifies harmful beliefs or actions like racism, it's not about defending boundaries, but perpetuating harm. Overall, what I'm saying about renovating our values is sometimes we're defending a boundary or a belief because it's based on our value. And I think, first of all, that's a sign. If we're fighting so hard, is the value really a value that is serving you in isolation, or is it a collective? Because often values are on a collective level. So are we basing our values off of like respect and equity and empathy? And if so, okay, then we shouldn't be having this kind of this little volume of a situation. But if we're claiming that our like values justify harmful beliefs or actions like racism, in these cases, the conversations shift from simply like protecting our boundaries to really addressing the underlying value of ignorance, exclusion, those kinds of things. So maybe there's like something we can challenge ourselves here with is, how does this value that I have, how does it serve others beyond myself? Does this value align with the principle of mutual respect and underlying? When we ask ourselves about this value aligning, defending boundaries isn't about forcing others to agree, but about being clear and confident. When we're talking about racism and a value, many of us, and all of us, women of color, when we get into these dynamics with white friends, white people, with our system, I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to say is some of these values in these conversations that are being sort of forced upon us that are seeping with like white supremacy, and it's not being done intentionally, but at the same time, it's very harmful in what's happening right before us. I think when these sorts of things happen, it's like we might see things differently, but my boundary, my value isn't really about challenging you in your belief. It's about ensuring mutual respect. So can we find common ground from that? If I can just like shift gears and talk about over apologizing, because I think this plays a part here too. When I feel the urge to over apologize, something I've been doing more lately is, am I apologizing because I genuinely feel sorry about something and I did something wrong? Or am I seeking validation? And I can choose your own adventure from those places. Is my response rooted in fear of conflict or a desire to maintain like this peace and we're all getting along? In these kinds of moments, I try to shift my mindset from defensiveness to assertiveness. Instead of over-explaining, I aim to be more maybe concise and firm. And that's a practice that's I'm working on here. Another thing I'm preparing for is this overcompensation. So I'm hoping that I can start to catch myself more when I'm doing that. So this like trying to please others to make up for setting a boundary. So it's like I might step up and say something to some of the white friends that I've gotten into some of these conflicts with. And can I do it? That really is about asserting this point, this boundary, and this power imbalance. And that's what I'm tending to here. And do it in a way that allows me to, but not feel like after I have to suck up or say something to make myself look stupid or dumb to again put myself below. That's how overcompensating shows up for me, and definitely not helpful in these moments if we're trying to teach each other how to come out stronger. With all of this, I think the most important piece is something a lot of our guests say, which is practicing with self-compassion. I think when I write a lot of this out, and what I find helpful is understanding that I really do want to do better, really do want to learn. I really do want to help the fellow women of color feel like I'm here to help carry this load. And I also hope that relationships with the system and the friends that I have, white women that I meet and talk to, we can find the algorithm that allows us to work through those power imbalances. Like, that's kind of why we're still doing this, is there's hope for that. And in order to have that hope, that self-compassion is so important. Gotta understand that I'm not going to get there tomorrow. It's going to take time, but am I committed to doing something about this every day? That's sort of the conversation I'm having with myself and with a lot of other women of color who are also figuring out how to renovate some of their boundaries and are sharing some ways that, it's working for them. So if we could just like unlock the bigger picture here first. Everything we're talking about, these moments of defensiveness and defending, are not one-offs. They are part of a system that isolates us, but when we share these stories, when we realize we're not alone, we learn about the impacts of our values and are they harmful? Where do I want to draw the line? These stories that we're sharing are not really just about venting. They are collecting data. They are helping us realize, oh, these strategies work. This helps. This is how we get the joy of reading books by a lot of women of color who share their expertise, professional and personal, in ways that we can look at the privilege that shows up in these power dynamics. The Angry Brown Girl Club isn't necessarily about staying angry. When we say that, we're talking about growth, connection, and those rewriting, rewiring our experiences, our narratives, our stories, our journeys, our paths. The whole point is like we're building this cool toolkit together that can help us navigate these power imbalances that show up and allow us to be invited to assert ourselves when necessary, and that it's not going to come back at us in a way of we're doing something wrong. So, what's your story? What roles have you found yourself in, and how are you rewriting them? Tell us, share. If we could for a second go back to the over-apologizing role. Here's another dynamic I've fallen into with the over-apologizing. Okay, so I was during I think in the beginning stages of realizing how much internal racism I had to work through. I remember a white friend presenting like an article across the table to me and written by some man of color, and basically said, "You seem angry, maybe this can help." There was like a lot of labeling and deciding for me about what that was. And to be honest, like I didn't even really see it. So I was very defensive of like, I'm not angry. I'm working through stuff. I'm being chill about it. Her gesture came off as very patronizing, and I didn't know how much more of responding in that time I could do. So I apologized for my anger. Even though it was valid, even though I realize now things that I would have done differently, but that story I'm grateful for because it helps me along my journey of where do I need to apologize and where I don't. Definitely the anger that is sacred that comes out, that invites us and puts us into this club, is the armor that we will continue to have to wear if we can't start to work through some of this power imbalance that's happening with white women and women of color. Maybe we can do some reflective questions in this interview. So when we're talking about apologizing, when have you apologized for something that you didn't need to? Was your apology about diffusing tension or taking accountability? Another role, the competitor's trap, so maybe I can share an example, is a white friend once suggested I recommend this like diversity course to another white woman who I was not happy was I was having back and forth conversations that involved a lot of microaggressions, and I didn't really know where to start and how to address it. So I was telling my other white friend about it. And so her response was, oh, I did this course, and believe it or not, even I learned something about it. And so maybe this person could benefit from it. And this upper hand of I know better, and because often what happens is white women don't really know how to validate or connect when we share a racial experience. And so this need to overcompensate, or the ego comes in to defend. And so there's try this, do this, write a letter to the mayor, do that. And we're just looking for validation and understanding. And it's not really the time to tell us to go take a course or tell someone to take a course that's really designed by a white person too. So it's actually not helpful. But also saying things like, oh, I'm surprised I even learned something too. It really shows a privilege in these conversations. It's like there are levels of being racist. So we need to understand that it's ingrained, it's in there, and everyone has these parts of them that we all have to unlock and work through. And when that doesn't happen in situations between white women and women of color, we often have nothing but to kind of walk away with overcompensating, feeling bad, or taking the number to the course. And I think we have to that's a great moment when we're feeling that upper hand of try this. That's a good time to interject with thanks. Here's what's happening, and here's what could be beneficial in this moment between you and I. But I guess what I'm trying to say is in this story, I started to realize, and a lot after was I always felt some of this upper hand was about me being brown, and I didn't have the proof. And so even though my gut would tell me otherwise, I didn't have a way to address it. And so that's where that apologies always comes for, or accepting this thanks for helping me and giving me this course sort of mentality that we have of, oh, you're so much better, thank you, that savior sort of thing. I think this competitor's trap that we get into, what it did for me was questioning, first of all, am I imagining this? Why is my gut making me feel this way? And then as I started to talk to other women of color, I started to realize these, again, aren't isolated things, that these microaggressions and patterns and dismissals and power plays are part of a bigger system. And it's really why this club exists. If we continue with the interview, and we can borrow some questions from Saira Rao and Ruby Hamad, who I have referenced throughout segments 1 and 2. Some of the tough questions that I appreciate that sort of these ones resemble are, when we look at defensiveness, the first question is what am I defending? Is it my values, my boundaries, or something deeper? What's clashing with my values here? Are these values upheld by others? Am I imposing them on someone else? If I feel defensive, what is this reaction protecting? My ego, my identity, my truth. What do I need to release to stop overcompensating for someone else's discomfort? And maybe going into exploring origin stories for the membership. When was the first time you realized your identity was treated differently? For some people, this could be as early as childhood, that whole making you feel othered. I really was impacted by that word when Saira had used it in Deconstructing Karen, the first time she had felt othered. And it's such a big, impactful word. We see it on our demographics forms all the time. And sometimes we look at it as thank you for the acceptance of other. But that's because it's a choice. When you're othered, it's not a choice, and you're basically put in this box. And so it's helpful to go back and look at sort of when did you realize it? For some, it's when they're younger. For me, it was way older. How has your name shaped your experiences? Did people mispronounce it? Were you ever pressured to change it? How did you feel about these moments over time? This is a huge one for me. I put this in here because my name, I've talked about this, plays a big part in my journey. I'm very honored by the name I was given. And, it's so funny. I talk about this today, and I'm also wearing my grandpa's sweater today. I was given this name by my grandpa. There's a beautiful story along with it, but I won't go into that side quest today. However, I don't say my name the way that it was given. I say it the way I have been taught by white people over time to say it. And I'm so far away from saying my name the way it's meant to, because I feel so disconnected. And it's also my gauge. I can tell where I am on my journey because I'm still not there yet. But we experience this a lot, and our name is a big part of our story. We were taught in the Western world it represents you, and look people in their eyes when you shake hands and you say your name. And it's hard because our name often is not met with that respect. What's a moment when you felt invisible or unheard because of your identity? This can reflect experiences with the system, the exclusion that you've experienced. Have you ever felt you had to perform or downplay your identity to be accepted? And how did that feel? How did that end up? If we shift to understanding the emotional impact behind this, what has hearing your name mispronounced repeatedly done to your sense of self? How do you feel when someone assumes you're lucky to be here? This one is one that I go back to because I feel very guilty about not sharing and recognizing my own privilege of being a Punjabi girl being born and growing up in Canada, but in a time where I was on the cusp of that survival generation and really getting into thriving. And here we are today. You and I are talking about my stories, and this is sort of how we're doing the work. A lot more fun than what the generations before us had to go through. So there's a lot of guilt. So when people remind me of, oh, don't forget, you're privileged too. You get to go on the same trip that we're going on. Yeah, I know. I recognize that. I have to live with that. I hear you. I really encourage when we do that, put the mirror back to you and let's ask ourselves, am I recognizing mine in this moment? Because it's really interesting when white people tell me to recognize my own privilege. Have you ever felt excluded or overlooked because of your identity? What did that teach you about yourself and the world? What are the small ways you've had to shrink yourself or adapt to avoid being seen as too much? I'm sure some of you are probably thinking about external features, hair, the curls, the thickness, the comments, the can I touch it, the comparison. This is the hard part. It's now we can relate on our hair being so similar, but what about the bigger things that are happening that you can't connect to or question that's happening? But here we all are, at the same level. So it's always picking and choosing when we're on the same level. And it's not the women of color that get to pick when that happens. How do you navigate spaces where you feel like you don't belong? This is huge. Seeing a racialized therapist, PSA, really recommend people of color finding a therapist that is either of the same race or of the similar culture. There are very different conversations we're having when it comes to boundaries and values and whatnot on that level. And the validation, it doesn't exist until you get it from someone of your own community that has the capacity and education to also help you understand what's happening. Holy crap. But the other thing to this PSA here is that please make sure whoever you are finding as your therapist, they are registered and abiding ethical regulations. A lot of people today, including myself, could claim as a therapist. I have a lot of mental health experience, a lot of professional and personal experience, but I'm not a therapist, and nor will I ever claim to be one. So just really want to encourage people who are finding therapists. I've heard really sad stories. People have messaged telling or asking if I know of where to go because they've had poor experiences. So please make sure that you are sharing your sacred stories and traumas with therapists that have the right education and registration and experience. And if you're not sure, reach out, we'll help you. Okay, back from the PSA. Fostering connections and resilience. So when you shared these stories, how are people responding to your experiences and your stories? Are you feeling seen? Are you feeling dismissed? Those are really good examples of sifting out how to better our relationships with our, the white friends or people in the community, but also like us individually as women of color, understanding like what it means to exist. And a lot of that is being seen and feeling heard. And what does that look like? Because for a lot of women out there, I'm not sure you really get to ask yourselves or experience that. But there's a huge connection to not having that and what it does to our self-worth. What strengths have you developed from these challenges? Some good can come out of this as well. And I really appreciate the women in the group chats that I get to talk to who have so much strength and knowledge and helpful tips on how they're working through that, as well as what can go well. It's been really helpful having those kinds of conversations. So a huge shout out to all those women. Thank you for being part of those data analysis moments. When was the last time you felt proud of who you are despite everything that we're talking about today? Like just you, yourself alone. When did you feel proud? If we can just kind of connect to our body, what do you feel in your body when you recall a lot of these moments of power imbalances, microaggressions, overcompensating, overapologizing, all these sort of dynamics that pop up? What do you feel in your body? Sometimes just starting with body and mind connection can help us feel like more clear on what path we need to go on when we're working through these experiences. If you could rewrite some of these moments, which one would you pick? And how would you respond differently? I'm thinking at the same time, I realize I got to also guide you guys. So that one I'm going to come back to, I think, for myself. What have some of these experiences taught you about your values and your boundaries and your sense of self? We are talking a lot about that. So what are you learning about yourself? Are they getting more clear? Who or what has helped you feel some strength in these moments? What would it look like to protect your heart while staying true to your identity? So just as we're coming to an end here, maybe some prompts and reflections I can leave you with. Think of a woman you admire who has navigated these power dynamics. What lessons can you learn from her journey, her story? Reflect on a time you felt your identity was treated differently. How did you respond, and what did you learn about yourself? Consider the women in your community. How can you support and uplift each other when facing these challenges? Like, if I could leave you with one more thing here, maybe I can clarify. The Angry Brown Girl Club isn't necessarily about staying angry. It's about identifying what that anger is and understanding that a lot of this is about connecting and building some strength together to rewrite some of these experiences. And so keep that in mind when we talk about staying angry. Thank you guys again. Thank you always for coming here, having this conversation with me. These conversations are door openers. So if there's anything we're saying here that you want to add on to, we're collecting data, as we say. We're trying to build our own strategies. And with all of your feedback that comes through after episodes like this, we really appreciate it. So thank you so much for your time today. Stay angry.